As I was saying, there are times when being a witch can be very satisfying. This is the No Fear podcast. We know it scares you.
I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa.
And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is the 7th episode of Season 3, and we are continuing our series devoted to witches.
So the opening quote was from Elizabeth Montgomery's character in the television show Bewitched. It was actually in season 2. I don't remember now which episode, but so last time on our last episode when we started talking about witches, we talked a little bit about their origins, and I started noticing a really interesting trend, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, Matt and Mel, because last episode we spent so much time talking about this character of the witch as being like this old woman. The word crone was brought up, how she's on the margins of society, and she's usually older and a little bit on the crazy side, and she doesn't have children, and she's not married, and she's not fulfilling any of these duties that a proper woman is supposed to be. So obviously she's in league with the devil. And we even talked about some of our favorite witches of that era. There was some talk about the Wicked Witch of the West, of course, from The Wizard of Oz. But then, I started thinking, that's not the only witch that I grew up with, because I loved the TV show Bewitched. Growing up, I used to watch it. I guess it came on Nick at Night. I don't really remember. But I used to watch that all the time. And obviously here you have a very pretty blonde woman who's married to, married to a very nice man, and she's in love, and they have children. And so she is a sharp change from that original kind of old crone character. In fact, at best, the only real, well, not the only ones, I mean, because it was like it was a mid-20th century TV show, but one of the big misogynist jokes was aimed towards the mother-in-law. So it wasn't even about her necessarily. She just happened to have really cool superpowers, and she could use them to twitch her nose, and all of a sudden the house was clean. Which, I don't know, for a 50s style housewife, I guess that was the ultimate, was being able to clean your house with the twitch of a nose. But this is an interesting shift, and it happened very quickly. Because not long after The Wizard of Oz, you had I Married a Witch in 1942 with Veronica Lake. And she is, obviously a very beautiful woman. And what is really interesting about her is that she actually plays the character she's playing is a throwback to the traditional historical witches, because she was a 17th century witch who is resurrected, and I don't really remember now, but she's very beautiful, and she uses that power for seduction, so she's still very dangerous. But we move into like romantic comedy territory, which is an interesting shift, and I don't know really what to make of that.
I was just going to say that one of the things that I actually thought about, I think, when I was younger and watching Bewitched, was the fact that you have this woman who has these, like you said, superpowers. And when she marries, she makes the promise that she's just going to, well, I shouldn't say just, but she's going to be a normal, quote unquote, suburban housewife, right? And so you said she would twitch her nose and use magic to like clean the house or something like that. And it's so 1950s, so 1950s, early 60s. And with I Married a Witch, she's supposed to be this kind of evil witch who's come back to take vengeance on the descendant of the descendant of the person who accused and killed her in Salem. But through some weird, like, slapstick comedy, she ends up falling under her own spell and wiles. And at the end of that movie, she makes a promise to be a quote unquote normal woman with no witchcraft powers. And so there's this really interesting kind of running. I don't know that this answers your question, but I thought it was really interesting that there seems to be a running theme of women with supernatural powers, in order to act on love, have to make promises to get rid of those powers, right? And whether the powers are evil or not, it's like you have to give up magic completely. And to the point where at the end of I Married a Witch, they're worried because they think one of her children might have witchcraft. It's like, how are you going to stop this girl from using witchcraft? And I just imagine if these movies are, if you made that movie now, like, the woman might actually celebrate her powers, maybe. I don't know. Maybe I'm giving people too much credit, but that kind of running idea of giving up your power in order to enter into the world, into this prescribed role, really kind of fascinated me, because it seemed to run along the same themes that we've talked about with other things in this podcast that were happening in the 50s and the early 60s.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to make of it either. And, I hadn't really connected it to domesticity quite in that way. It had always bugged me a little bit that, well, no, I take the back. I just loved Bewitched wholeheartedly when I was younger. I mean, I think it did cross my mind that, like, if I had her powers, I would not use it just to clean the house or cook dinner or, fix what. Like, I think it did kind of bother me when I was like, you're a witch. Why are you trying so hard to do things the normal way? But I had, looking back, because now I'm thinking, because there was that other movie, Bell, Book, and Candle in 1958, which starred Kim Novak as the witch character, and kind of like those, she starts out for revenge, and she casts like a love spell, but she does it to break somebody up. But then she ends up falling in love for real. And when you kind of look at it, like, it does kind of just the whole, all three of those taken together of a witch, a very powerful woman, becoming powerless because she falls in love. Everybody is so quick today, I think, to jump on Disney movies, especially The Little Mermaid. I've read a lot of articles lately about people speaking out against The Little Mermaid, which I don't know. But I always like The Little Mermaid, but because Ariel obviously is so willing to give up her voice for a man, and people find problems in that, or to use an academic term, Melanie. It's problematic. When that happens, when a woman is so willing to give up her voice or her power. But nobody has really picked up on these quite yet, these movies where you have extremely powerful women and they are more powerful than anybody in the movie, especially the men. I mean, the men are essentially powerless to them at the beginning, especially the ones who are seeking out love spells. And then they seem to be so willing to give it up when they find love. And yeah, it's strange to put a witch in the middle of a romantic comedy, I think.
Well, I think what's interesting too with it is the fact that it's a witch at all. I mean, Bewitched, I just looked it up while you both were talking because I wanted to get the date right. I mean, it started in 1964, and at the end of its first season, it was the second most popular TV show in America. And what strikes me as interesting is that this is, I mean, she's a witch, and I say that because, you don't, I don't think of mid-century America as being a place where witchcraft would be something that people would relish having on TV. I mean, we're only like, 10 years out from the McCarthy hearings, but I guess that just shows how much has changed in American culture between the 50s and the 60s, because, I mean, the 1950s, the establishment, the old guard, was completely beside themselves because Elvis Presley shook his hips on TV, and then not too much longer you've got like literal witches, and her being a witch, yes, it's something that her husband knows and that they're trying to keep secret, and they're always trying to, I mean, that's always cause for hijinks and chaos where he doesn't want his boss to find out he's married to a witch or that witches are real, whatever. But the simple fact that this exists and it's treated as just absolutely normal, and you didn't have public outcry. You didn't have, religious leaders saying, or at least not en masse, that this is, corrupting our youth by glorifying witchcraft on television and all that. No, I mean, it was maybe because it was a sitcom and it was relatively tame and defanged, and like the magic in it wasn't like, glorified or something like that. But I mean, it really, for me, it's a striking example of how quickly the culture changed, and in the 60s, how permissible things were compared to just a decade earlier.
Yeah, and I feel like there's a couple of things that are going on with it. I mean, as you said, one of the things they had to do was they had to make the witch powerless by the end. They couldn't take it too seriously. So either she had to be, as in Bewitched, she had to be trying to pretend that this wasn't a part of her, or she had to be willing to give it up for love, or realizing that she was powerless to her own, her own magic, when it came to sexy time with a man. But I think too, when you look at it, is a lot of these women who especially like Bewitched, Bell Book and Candle, I Married a Witch, they're all beautiful blonde white women, and I think that was code for she's okay even though she's a witch. She's not one of those witches, at least for like you said, like the 50s. They were still kind of easing into it because there was some other things going on in the culture, even though there was the extreme conservative nature of a lot of people, and this is bookended by a lot of censorship in film and movies and things, but this is also around the same time as the birth of like the Addams Family, and things that would take it just a little bit darker. I know that wasn't explicit like witchcraft, but characters like Vampira and stuff, I mean, mm-hmm. This idea of taking the kind of quote unquote good housewife and turning it on its head and making it something kind of dark and dangerous, like that was also happening in, I don't know if you want to call it really counterculture, but there was at least a thread of that running through culture that I think this was playing with, and they just had to make the witch characters in these TV shows and movies as harmless as they could. And so, making them perky and bubbly and blonde, I think helped that.
Oh yeah. I agree. I mean, if you think, I was kind of surprised with I Married a Witch. It's a movie that's comes out in 1942, and like she spends about a quarter of the movie naked. And I mean, she was, of course, Veronica Lake was kind of a pinup girl, right? Especially for that time period during the war. But yeah, it's like we think back on the 40s and we're like, man, that, there's very conservative kind of time. But the thing is, like you were just saying, Lisa, the turn in the movie is that she's this bad girl And I mean, the fact that she has just kind of this wanton sexuality is blatant in your face. But then, yeah, her spells backfire, and then she has to be good again, right? So it's like it's the taming of the woman,
Well,
and using the Salem witch trials again, which like we've done our PSA about leaving them alone, but it like uses this historical thing, like everybody knows about the Salem witches, and then it's like then it takes the woman character, makes her wanton and witchy in a sexual way, right? A witch, an evil woman, the opposite of the virginal woman is going to be a family person, and then makes her be what they want what society wants her to be.
yeah. Well, and I think that is an important distinction, is that she starts out as being the sexy, sultry seductress. I mean, Veronica Lake, my goodness. you know, I mean, she's beautiful, but like you said, she was also, that was her reputation. And people knew when they saw her. I mean, she of the sultry side part. I mean, they knew what they were getting when they saw a Veronica Lake movie, and that was what was dangerous about her. And then, I mean, I guess, I don't know if we get a Bewitched prequel, but I guess we can assume that she was also like a sexy seductress until she fell in love, because that's what witches are. They're conniving, they're backstabbing, they're they're extremely sexual, and they're open about their sexuality, and then but as long as they get married in the end and put aside their witchy ways, they're okay. Well, when we're talking about like the mid 20th century and what's happening with the evolution of the witch in pop culture, again, and this is where I just find the 20th century so fascinating when it comes to witches, because for so long witches were just one thing, and then it shifts with everything that we were talking about with these sexy women, these dangerous women, becoming housewives, and something that's okay to be like, oh well, they're just like us, witches, they're just like us. But around the 60s and 70s, you started to see that shift again. And you still had the attractive women, but suddenly they became much more dangerous. And I know this is one that we've talked about before, but the novel Conjure Wife by Fritz Leiber, that was made into the episode of The Twilight Zone. And it was also adapted to a film, 1962's Burn Witch Burn, and I cannot for the life of me remember the name of the Twilight Zone episode. But it's the one where the professor has this great academic career going on, and then he discovers that his wife has been a witch the whole time and has basically been I don't know what she's been conjuring, but she's been conjuring up things and doing spells to make sure that his career is going well. And in that sense, it becomes like a betrayal, because I guess unlike a Bewitched, he isn't in on it in the same way that Darren is. And it almost becomes this emasculating thing, because she's still dangerous, she's still deceitful, and to me that marks a really interesting. And I mean, this was 1962, so some other things had been happening. For instance, Black Sunday, the Mario Bava film in 1960, which was the witches were not quite as nice as the Bewitched variety or the Veronica Lake variety. But you still had that. I don't know. Mel? I know you watched a lot of Twilight Zone. Do you remember the episode I'm talking about?
No, I don't. And I was actually just trying, while you were talking, I was trying to look it up, and I have not found it yet.
I know I did not make this up. I wish my brain just stopped.
Because the Conjure Wife has inspired 3 films, I think, right? Night of the Eagle is the one you're talking about, Burn Witch
Yeah,
Burn.
right.
And then I think there was another one, Weird Woman maybe, and Witch is Witch. I think those 2 might have also been inspired. But I'm not sure about the Twilight Zone episode.
This is gonna drive me bonkers. I will figure this out. I wish I know maybe I did make it up. Maybe I just saw Burn Witch Burn and imagined it as a Twilight Zone episode. Which is, again, quite possible.
Hey, if it's not a Twilight Zone episode, it should be one.
It should be a Twilight Zone episode.
Yeah, Night of the Eagle is a movie that I remember coming across like few years ago or whatever, but I have not watched it yet.
Yeah, it's a good one. I think in that one that if I'm remembering it right, because now I'm questioning everything about my memory of this movie. But if I remember right, so he learns that she's been practicing magic and he feels betrayed, and it's a really interesting twist when you look at especially gender roles and gender expectations in a domestic situation. Because of course he immediately wants her to stop what she's doing, and she won't, because she's insistent that his other colleagues also have magic working on their side. And so if she stops what she's doing, that they're going to not only win, but kind of destroy him as well. Which is this really interesting, because you start to see in the 60s and 70s that there's a lot of paranoia around the idea of witches, kind of like, well, Rosemary's Baby, we can talk about that in a minute. But this idea that there's like a secret coven right next door to you that you don't know about, or that witches are controlling, some aspect of your life in some sort of way. And so they kind of play up on that paranoia in this. And I think he ends up destroying all of her magic equipment, basically, for lack of a better word. And she begs him not to. But then he meets the ultimate, and this is where I think I must have thought it was a Twilight Zone episode, because it has that big twist in the end where it turns out that she was right, and that his colleagues also are practicing magic, and he wants her help by the end, but she can't give it to him. And so it does that nice little twist, I guess. But now this is going to drive me crazy why I thought it was a Twilight Zone episode. Anyway, I hope if any of our listeners are listening and you're shouting right now as you're listening to this, because it is, please email me or find me on social media so I don't feel crazy.
I think
at NoFearCast for the Twitter, NoFearCast@gmail.com.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I'm seeing here, I was looking up the movie, and apparently a critic said that it was a very realistic portrayal of campus and professor politics, which now I really have to see this movie. Because, witchcraft would be, I guess. Everybody is using a witch to get ahead. And then the other thing I noticed, and this is in the movie, so I can't speak to the book, but apparently his whole job is as a psychology professor lecturing about superstition, and then discovers his wife is a witch. But also it appears like she appropriates Jamaican spirituality in the description. It says that she is a practicing Obeah. And not just your typical witch. So I thought that was an interesting characteristic there.
Yeah, I have not read the book, and I want to. But I've seen the movie, and it is really interesting because it brings up I mean, it's smart. I feel like in the way it plays on all of this ideas, because it does kind of bring up the especially the earlier voodoo movies, and we've talked about some in earlier seasons, but especially where you have white practitioners of voodoo in those films, and how again, to use the term, problematic that can be. But the way they play it out, it's really interesting the way it plays out in the movie, but also because he is an academic, and that is part of what causes him. It's not just the betrayal that he sees from his wife that he can't get around. It's that she is doing this superstitious mumbo jumbo stuff when he has built his whole life around being rational. And that is almost the ultimate betrayal for him. Not necessarily that she's a practicing witch or whatever she calls what she does. But it's not just that she's like dabbling in the occult or that she has this secret from him. It's that, you know, he's built his life and his identity around this professional life. And that is the betrayal. And that is what I find really interesting too. And of course, we're all in an academic environment here on this podcast. I don't know. I would, if you're going to go out and watch a witch movie, I would watch Burn Witch Burn, because I think it's worth it. And not to be confusing, but Burn Witch Burn was the U.S. release title, and then I think Night of the Eagle was the British release.
Yes, yeah, it was evidently a British American effort, and so I think they were released around the same time, but they had different names.
Yeah, I think the British one might have been just a little bit earlier, but it's great. I like it. But yeah, a little bit different from some of the other, I think, true. That is more of almost intellectual horror, much in the same way like a Twilight Zone episode might be. But if you look at some of the other ones like Black Sunday, or even Rosemary's Baby, which I think more people are familiar with, it takes this idea of witches hidden all around you to a truly terrifying level.
Oh yeah, they can just be your neighbors in your apartment building. Your nice little old couple neighbors can be witches working for Satan, wanting to take her child. Rosemary's Baby is creepy.
Rosemary, yeah.
He does like the horror under normal everyday life so good. It's almost as good as Shirley Jackson, but it's just like the creepiness of everyday life. That's Rosemary's Baby. That your neighbor could be anything. You think they're normal, but quote unquote normal, but they're actually part of a coven, or they're Satan worshipers.
You know, this is a little off topic, but not really. I'm bringing up Rosemary's Baby because that's been remade a few times, and you know, it's one that people love. They love the idea of that, and I think it's exactly what you were talking about. This idea of not being able to trust your neighbors, and that, you know, they may be out to not only destroy your family, but destroy the world through your offspring. But for our listeners, so we have a Patreon account, and our Patreon members, if you come in at a certain level, you get mini episodes in the off weeks when we don't have a regular episode coming out. So you would get No Fear episodes every week. And the last one that we got talking about witches in the news and some of these stories dealing with witches out in the real world. And one of the things I had mentioned was this idea that I'm starting to see more witch fashion. And the other day I actually saw a necklace that and I think they described it as like a pendant locket that you could put herbs in.
Oh no.
Or yeah, exactly. You know where? Yeah. And their idea was like, you could put little like lavender seeds in there, and it would relax you all day. And I'm like, or your neighbor
could put something in there that would attract Satan to you.
Put tannis root so that your Satan spawn would grow well.
Exactly. And give you like a protein shake or whatever on the side.
I mean, I wish I could find this again. I wish I could find it again because I don't. It looked just like it. It looked just like it. And surely they knew. Surely they knew what they were doing, but they didn't let on that they knew what they were doing.
Oh man! Also, another shameless plug for the podcast. If any of you listeners are Ira Levin fans, Rosemary's Baby, Stepford Wives, we did a whole Master of Horror episode on him, and Lisa and I went off on our usual tangents about Rosemary's Baby. So that might be worth a look back. I can't. Was that season 2? When we did that, I cannot remember.
I think so that sounds right, but I don't have the schedule in front of me, so I don't know. I think a lot of these later witch movies in like the 60s and 70s, so we'll call them the like post Bewitched movies. A lot of them still deal with witches in the domestic realm. It's just that they're no longer so happy-go-lucky. It's not going to turn into a rom-com. It's going to be, it's going to have disastrous results. And I will say there's one movie that I've been wanting to watch. I don't know if either of you have seen it, but it's on my list now, is Season of the Witch. Now, not to be confused with Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. This was a 1972 film. I think it was originally titled Hungry Wives, and then at some point it got switched to the Season of the Witch. But this was actually written and directed by George Romero. And I know we've talked about him in the past when we talked about zombies, and I've mentioned that one of my favorite vampire films was a Romero vampire film. And so a lot of people don't think about him doing other things like branching out beyond the zombie, but he did. And this one sounds great because it's about basically like a suburban housewife who is hating her life, and she's hitting a midlife crisis. I think she's older, so she's not exactly the kind of young chirpy blonde woman. She's starting to age and she's unhappy, and so she starts visiting a lady who introduces her to witchcraft and the occult. And I have a feeling, I haven't seen that movie, but I have a feeling that things take a very dark turn when she starts like dabbling in this. But it sounds really interesting. Have y'all seen it at all?
I have not. I have not seen it at all.
Yeah, I wasn't even aware of it until you were telling us about it, Lisa.
Oh, well.
now we have to watch this.
Well, I mean, I know that Matt is a big Romero fan, and so I didn't know if you had ever come across this.
I haven't, and like Mel, I had not heard of it before either. I mean, I feel kind of ashamed that I have not even heard of it before, to be honest. But yeah, it's getting added to the list of it's getting added to the list of things to watch very soon, for sure.
Yeah, that's what we're all about on the No Fear Cast, shaming people.
Shaming people into watching horror movies. That's what we do. No, I have to say, though, I mean, speaking of shame, there's quite a bit in this time period that I have not watched that I would be really interested in seeing. So Season of the Witch is one. But apparently there was also a Hammer film that came out in '66 called The Witches, which again, not to be confused with one, Matt, that I think you had talked about. And yeah, I would love to see those, and I haven't. They sound really interesting, and I haven't seen those yet. But probably a good place, I think, to end our discussion of this, because we could keep talking about the evolution of the witch, but I see another shift happening once you get like to the 80s and the 90s and whatever you call the 2000s. But the movie Suspiria, because the new one just came out, and I'll go ahead and say I have not seen the new version of it yet. I will. It's on my list. And I've been hearing good things. So I'm cautiously optimistic about it. But the original Suspiria is probably one of my favorite films. Definitely one of my favorite witch films of this era. Because it kind of brings up the same ideas of like Rosemary's Baby, of this idea of an innocent who gets tangled into an evil web when she finds out that people aren't who they say they are, and how there are witches, and not only just witches, but covens and secret societies that are hiding in plain sight. So I don't know. Have you guys seen Suspiria, or am I gonna have to shame you again?
You're gonna have to shame me.
Yeah, me as well.
So it sounds interesting. I mean, just your blurb there, dance school as front for Witch Coven. I mean, just like that's an amazing pitch right there.
You guys, oh my gosh. Okay, see, and I'm not going to say much because, number one, if you have not seen Suspiria, then you need to see it. And I don't want to spoil too much, because there's just some good scenes in that movie, and I think you need to see it with fresh eyes. But what I will say is that it deals with this young girl, and of course it always has to be kind of a young innocent kind of wide-eyed girl, I guess, who comes into this place, and she has dreams of being a dancer, and so she gets accepted into this very prestigious dance school, and nothing is as it seems. And one thing that I love about this movie, and I'll just kind of dangle this as a little teaser, is that the school, at least in this, I don't know if it's going to be this way in the new one, but at least in the original, it is set in Germany. So she has to travel to Germany, which adds to her, she's away from home. There's some homesickness and not really, being in a foreign place. But it also has this wonderful fairy tale imagery. And it really evokes a lot of those like original Grimm's fairy tales, which brings us back to our discussion last time of the witch being the evil character in those films. And so you have some wonderful imagery of like the Black Forest, and she's almost like a Snow White heroine in it, and just visually and in how she's portrayed. I don't know, it's really fantastic. It's really well done. The original was directed by, well, I guess, and written, the screenplay was written by Dario Argento. So it's one of his, and I always butcher the saying of this because I'm Southern and things don't come out right, but the Gallo film. So, like I said, Y'all have to watch it because Suspiria is wonderful. And I feel like if you're, and I don't know, I haven't seen the new one, but I feel like everyone before you see the new one should at least see the original to know what you're dealing with. But that's just it. And one more thing, while we're on recommending movies, apparently there was a movie that came out, and again, I haven't seen this one, so I'm shaming myself, called The Love Witch, which came out a couple of years ago. But apparently it's like an ode to these 1960s Technicolor movies we've been talking about beautiful women who are conjuring up spells for love and, are dangerous in the process. So it fits well. I didn't get a chance to watch it before this episode, but I'm adding that to my list along with Season of the Witch because I feel like I need to watch those quickly, and I'll probably rewatch the old Suspiria before I watch the remake, if they're calling it that. I don't know if they're calling it a remake or I don't know what it is, but like I said, I'm cautiously optimistic. So,
well, seeing as how Mel and I seem to have a very big gap in our knowledge of movie history of witches, this might be a good place for us to go ahead and wind up this episode. But before we go, I did just want to remind everybody, I know you hear this from all of your podcasts, but please rate and review us on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you're listening to this. We really are proud of the stuff that we do, and the only way that people can find us is by getting recommendations, and that's all generated from reviews and ratings. So if you like what you're hearing, please help spread the word. And as always, you can follow us on social media. I kind of jumped in with a snarky comment about it, but we are No Fearcast on all the major platforms, Twitter, Instagram, nofearcast.com, and please feel free to send us an email, nofearcast@gmail.com. The three of us, we've gotten emails from people, and it really does, it makes our day just to even get the responses from people, or even the mentions on Twitter. So, please reach out if you want to, if you have a question, a comment, anything like that. We really like hearing that kind of stuff. But yeah, just as I said, please rate and review and all of that. But even if you don't do any of that, we do thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.